I want to give a couple different parts to it. First of all, think about the idea, and one of the objectives of military planners is the idea of being able to model the brain so completely that you could literally synthesize ideas or learning and download that information directly into the brain where it's retained into permanent memory. So in other words, for language learning, instead of doing it over years, maybe doing it over weeks. This is a kind of direction in which this is headed. Now, in a framework of compulsory education, this becomes extremely important. We're required by law to send our kids to schools. The idea that curriculum is directed by government and developed by government, as long as it comes in and our conscious filters are working, right and wrong, the things we learn from our parents, from our churches, from our synagogues, places where we gather our values, all of a sudden they don't count. If you use these systems bypassing the conscious, dropping information directly into subconscious, that is a very, very different situation. And this transition will happen. This will move from classified technologies over to civilian uses, and in compulsory education, it's the ultimate 1984 scenario. So extremely important. It's one of the reasons why I'm the only statewide president of a teachers association that agrees that vouchers are not such a bad idea. And really it's about choice anyway. If you look at the worst of schools in the country, go to look at the inner city New York schools and ask what they spend per capita on each kid, and it's about, for the average classroom, $300,000 a year. And I ask you, can you do better with $300,000 a year? And the answer is absolutely yes. And I want to talk about Ritalin, and I want to talk about some of the things that we've done. There was an initiative during the first Bush administration. It was supposed to be a $400 million initiative. They were going to go into inner city schools, and they were going to take and talk to teachers, interview teachers about who the students were that were acting out. Then they were going to interview the parents, and then they were going to medicate on a mass basis kids across this country. Now, the guy who was the head of the Psychiatric Association that was pushing for this back in that time got up in front of his association, several thousands of members, and referred to inner city people as primates. And this was the end of that initiative, and thank God his racial bias showed up. And I can tell you, if that was in place, I wouldn't be standing here today because I acted out. Now, I followed the rules, but I didn't believe everything the script was being told to me. I challenged my teachers. They had to rationalize what they said. They had to argue the points logically. They couldn't just shove it at me and me absorb it and say, okay, that's the way it is. Well, I would have been one of those identified as the trouble kid because they couldn't stick to the script that was in the book or the teacher's manual. They had to have knowledge beyond it to have a debate with me. This is important. There was a guy in Maryland, and his name escapes me, and I apologize for that because I think he's one of the heroes, and he's still at this work. He opposed it then, and he stopped it. He's opposing it now because it's coming back around, and they brought it in a different way. But Ritalin and the drugs associated with it, did you see Friday's issue of USA Today? The more bad news, beyond what we know. So it's not just about dumbing them down, it's about numbing them down. And when you look at the alternatives, Minneapolis School District took this on, and what they did is they used neurobiofeedback, brain biofeedback. And what this is, very important for stroke recovery, addictions, ADHD, various attention deficit disorders, hyperactivity. And what it does is, in the case of children, they have these really cool little helmets now. So they look like a bicycle helmet. They fit on their head, and they have built-in electrodes that are monitoring brain activity. And then they get a computer screen that might have like a bouncing ball or a guy racing. And the idea is by just using your brain wave patterns to get the guy to win the race or the ball to bounce higher. What the kids do is they work with these an hour a day for 30 to 40 days, after which time, and by being able to do it, they're bringing their brain into the right zone for learning. What happens after 30 to 40 sessions with biofeedback, it's like riding a bicycle. Once they learn where that zone is and how to get there readily, they don't need the drugs. 80% of the children in that charter school were off of psychoactive drugs in the first year and back in regular education classrooms by learning how to use what they already had and forget the chemicals. That is so important. It's spreading. It's spreading across Minnesota and Wisconsin and the Midwest. People don't think of Minnesota as educational leaders, but they are. If you look historically, innovative technology and innovation in education often originates in the state of Minnesota. And it's just a fact. But if you email me, someone took the time, because I said in one of these lectures, and I say them in all of them, if you care about kids, and you care about yourself, because it costs 7, 8, 9 times more per year to educate a special needs child in many cases than a regular education child. If we can, not just for what it does for the individual child, but every taxpayer benefits if we can cure this thing so that forever, for the rest of their lives, they're not fighting this thing, and the rest of us absorbing the costs along with their pain. So it's something we can do. There's 15,000 school boards in the United States alone. You know, it's something you can get. So we will post in the next few weeks. Someone just sent me the whole narrative of where the department is in the Minneapolis School District and all that. We'll post it on the lay site, and we'll post it at earthpulse.com, which is my site, which gives you the contact points so you can get some information, be a committee of one, send it to your school board, and maybe we can see this thing spread and we can see a change in that direction. So that's an assignment for whoever is inclined and so moved. The other thing about that, the brain biofeedback that's exciting, and they have a lot of sophisticated technologies. I mean, I want to show a couple of simple ones. This one, and this is one that's up here, this does a couple of things. Everybody knows kinesiology, right? You know, where they're doing the muscle thing, the muscle strength. And everybody kind of wonders about that. You know, is it really the guy pushing or not pushing, because it's kind of subjective? You know, and I think kinesiology has a lot of validity, so don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But they have what are called muscle tensiometers that will fit around the arm and actually measure objectively muscle strength. Now, you can go on the internet and you can find them. Why aren't kinesiologists using them? It'd be much better for the patient and the kinesiologist when the patient can say, oh, you know, 5 pounds of pressure, 20 pounds of pressure, you know? I mean, and there's something objective. Well, this uses muscle tensiometers. This one you can see has gotten a little bit overused. Muscle tensiometers. And these are just 3 little digits here going into the circuit. But basically they fit, this thing fits as a headband on the forehead, because whenever you're stressed or tense, these muscles tense up. So it measures that muscle tension. This has the Nick Begich 3-button rule, because I like devices with 3 buttons. More than that, you know, turned into the flashing VCR for years. You know, this one you got a button, an on and an off switch, real simple, a volume control, and a sensitivity control. And what this does, you'll hear a tone. Starts out high pitched, and as you relax, and you try and drive that tone to its lowest point as you're wearing the device. Then you increase the sensitivity, and you keep increasing the sensitivity until you max the dial. And by using a device like this for half an hour to 45 minutes a day, 30 to 40 days, it's an alpha trainer. When you hit the lowest sensitivity, you're in the 7 to 8 hertz range. Now what this is 1 to 4 hertz is delta, deepest states of sleep, hertz, vibrations per second, pulses per second. Think about it in those terms. From 4 to approximately 7 hertz is theta. This is where 3 to 5, 3 to 7-year-olds spend most of their time, which is where you and I are when we're between awake and asleep, consciously aware of our dreams. Explains a lot about little kids and why we shouldn't be having them in academic learning, because that doesn't happen until you get 7 to 12 hertz, this ideal state, the zone for the athlete, the zone for the creative person, that special place when you're just like on target. You know, the vibration of the earth, 7.83 hertz, Schumann's resonance, right? Now you heard somebody say, Greg Braden started this, and I've asked people to go back to him and ask him for the source, and so far it's never come back. It has not been rising. Go to UCLA, you're right in their back door. Within the institution they monitor Schumann's resonance every 15 minutes. And it varies a little bit, but not that much.
Now,
hold the questions, please. The thing about Schumann's resonance is right in the perfect place for the ideal performance of human brain function. And what have we done? We've surrounded ourselves with 60 cycles in this country, which becomes the dominant frequency because it overrides everything else. But what do we do when we first walk in? All day we're insulated with rubber soles on our shoes. We're insulated from ground. We get home, we kick our feet off, and what's the first thing? You know, because you're grounded. Again, you know, that energy is flowing. Think about the athlete who's running, building up static charges. You know, he's running the races and he's really in great shape, and he's the jogger and he drops dead of a heart attack. You know, what's going on? He's got rubber soles, right? He's building up static discharges in the right condition. Those charges build, they interfere with heart rhythm, has a heart attack. How could you solve that? You could inject a little bit of carbon in the construction of the soles of shoes, which make them conductive, so every time you hit the ground you discharge the energy. That would be useful. If you didn't have that, you could actually drive a metal rivet through the shoes so that it went all the way through, so that your body, feet as they sweat, allow conductivity to shoot through, so every time you hit the ball of your feet when you're jogging, you discharge the energy. In terms of two people, how many of you all have heard, you know, I looked into her eyes, right? That whole deal, you know. When you look in someone's eyes and you hold the gaze, and it's someone that you love, someone you care about, both of your systems begin to resonate together. You know, that's a powerful thing. You know, the whole story, two or more gather together, you know, all things, you know. Resonance, it's more than the sum of the total. It's a basic rule. It's a basic thing in science. These I like as muscle tensiometers because they're simple, they're basic. The more complex brain biofeedback devices run into many thousands of dollars. This is a simple one. I got a couple of them around. These are 169, so they're still a bit pricey, but they're a nice technology for alpha training. After your 30 or 40 sessions, you can hand it off to the next guy. And this one's been used by a lot of different people over the years on loan, but they work very well, and they're really excellent for that purpose. Now there's other, this one is the thought stream, and this is a little bit different one. I don't like it because it's got too many settings and there's too many variables. It has a couple of things. This is measuring tension levels, and what first happens is the device is clicked on, and you'll see this light, it'll just flash for a few minutes, it'll stabilize for my system. And the idea is it'll stabilize in red, and the idea is just to get it to go to green. So once it stabilizes, now I got to try and relax while I'm having a conference. So let's see how good I can do this. That's not cooperating. You'll see it go orange a little bit. Okay, maybe I can sit down for a second. Let me try that. It'll laugh a little bit, make it go down. Let's see. Okay, so it's basically, and also it gives you an auditory tone, so you can close your eyes, which is a lot more effective than trying to be a speaker and relax. Now I'm smiling, so it's going with me. But there, you know, and that tells you something. You know, I'm a very relaxed person when I speak. You know, I'm more tense when I have to stop. You know, what does that tell you? And you know, the thing about these tools is these are things that enhance your performance, that are under your control, which is why again, I like them. You know, the CEO of Magical Blend was here, and I met him, and you know, and I didn't get a chance to tell him, but back years ago in 1985, they did a really great article on light and sound device. I think it was about 85, and it really caught my attention. And you know, a ways back, and I began to experiment with them because Reijo's work in electrophysiology, which I'd become acquainted with much before, there really weren't the instruments for creating these oscillating fields. So light and sound became kind of interesting. This one was one of the early devices. It was called a Supermind. I think these are off the market because of medical claims and the FDA interfering, but there's lots of other devices that do the same thing. You can see this one's gotten a bit of use. This was my first one. And this was had preset programs and was programmable. And what it did is it combined a couple of things. It combines a headset and flickering light. And to create, first with the headset, a binaural beat. Now, remember what I was saying about the frequency ranges 1 to 4 for delta, and then the 4 to 7 approximately for theta, and then approximately 7 to 12 for the alpha ranges, and then above that is the beta ranges, where most of us are unless I put somebody to sleep. The story with that is that we can't hear frequencies that low. Our ears don't go that low. You know, the perimeter is a little bit higher, usually several hundred hertz higher, and it goes up to approximately 24,000 hertz at the absolute best most acute hearing, and most of us are quite a bit less than that, around 20,000 hertz, more or less. So how do you get the brain to hear a low-frequency signal in terms of auditory? Well, Monroe, how many know about Robert Monroe? Yeah, see, I'm in the right crowd. Robert Monroe figured out binaural beat, which is the idea of sending in a signal through a headset, any headset, through one ear at, say, 17,000 hertz or vibrations per second, and one at, say, 17,007, and in the middle of the cranium, they cancel and leave a standing wave, in that case, of a beat frequency of 7 hertz within the alpha range. Only as he does it, you go from a state where the brain's balance is usually one side more than the other to a perfectly balanced, in harmony, right and left hemisphere. The ideal state for most human activity. This is what we were supposed to be like. When you look at little kids, you see a lot more of this and a lot less of this. As we educate them, we destroy their capacity to fully access creative and analytical capacities to work together. Now in Europe, they don't make the same mistake. They start their kids there in school around 7 years old, which is the right age. Because when they're young, what are they learning in that 3 to 5, 3 to 6 year old? Language, social, I mean, they're like sponges just sucking it in. And they have trouble figuring out reality, our reality at least, you know, in imagination, and they fall back and forth. And they quit daydreaming, quit that. That's their natural state. Leave them alone, you know, encourage them to be creative, to think and to play, so that when they get to the point of learning analytically, they have both sides doing what they're intended to do. You know, we're taking kids and we're saying, oh, their attention deficit disorder, we're diagnosing way, way too young. They haven't fully developed intellectually and mentally, or maybe they have, okay? It depends on how where you stand. I say they've developed perfectly normally. It's us who have interfered with that normal progression of learning. So we need to look at that normal progression, what happens to us physiologically, make sure the learning applications match that. And education is 50 years, they're building factory workers. They're not building thinkers for the 21st century. They're not actualizing human beings. What our objective, you know, look at Maslow's hierarchy, you know, Maslow's hierarchy, food, clothing, and shelter, safety, security, you know, belongingness, part of a group. You know, we all belong to the human race, but the pinnacle of that is self-actualization, reaching our highest and best potentials. That's what all of our objectives are in life. That's what everybody's objectives are in life. And that's what institutions of education should be emphasizing, which is why, again, I support parental choice on education. So you can get every kind of model that could possibly exist to make sure that it's tailored to amplify what's inherently inside each of us. Not trying to cookie cutter the thing, because it doesn't work that way. Light and sound, there's several of them up here. Because this is a small group, if we have time at the end, I have no problem with people wanting to play around with them. This is the Orion, which is a predecessor to the one I have here, the Proteus. This one has 23 preset programs. They do essentially relaxation, meditation, increasing energy levels, and it uses a combination. This has got a few more buttons, but it's still fairly simple. Just to activate it, what you'll see, it has a light intensity. You close your eyes when you're looking at these lights. So your eyes are closed, the lights flicker through the eyelid. They follow specific patterns under the preset programs. If you have any history of epilepsy, you cannot use these devices. Not this one anyway, because it will trigger those events. Then you have the binaural beat coming in through the headset, and everything's programmed in it. So you have 23 preset programs. You have a dual jack, which gives you a little bit more flexibility in the sense that I can jack in an audio tape that I make with my own affirmations, because there's nothing more powerful than your own voice, because you trust yourself. At least I hope you do. You trust yourself enough to hear your voice to amplify and anchor ideas. There are learning programs built in this so that you can do that, or learning tapes or lectures, language, whatever it is that you're interested in anchoring. Their programs preset. The one that was upgraded above this is the same model. They just changed the case and name as a Sirius, and I'm out of them. I ran out of them. They're $130. They're very inexpensive compared to a lot of things out there. The Proteus is more. It has 50 preset programs. It also, you can download software to go with it from the internet that'll get you 200 additional programs, plus you can program to some level yourself. So it gives you some flexibility, and it also gives you the waveform so you can see what's going on the screen. A few more options, a few more bells and whistles, a little more coloration in the lights, but a very excellent tool for brain entrainment, for reaching those states. And how these work is through what's called frequency following response, FFR. And you'll see it show up occasionally in the literature. And it's the idea that external oscillating fields, the brain will lock onto certain fields and mirror them. Frequency following response. So you begin to mirror them. And so these technologies are designed not like biofeedback, not like these, where you're really just picking up your own energy and it's giving you some signal as to what it's doing, but it's you sort of doing it. You're learning how to do it. It's like the building the muscle of the brain up, because you're actually working with it. These are drivers. They put you there. They take you to that place, and they hold you there. And over time, using it in the same program mode, over time, you would get enough familiarity with where that place is to go there yourself. You wouldn't need the tool. But as a driving tool to very quickly reach places where meditators may not reach for 10 or 12 years, you can get to within a few days. So those are why I liked them. Now my friend who studied meditation for 20 years and was a meditator for 20 years would get all over me and he'd say, "You're cheating." You know? Well, flap your wings, buddy, next time you come to visit me. You know, and it's true. I mean, when the automobile was invented, people objected. When the planes were invented, oh, man, it wasn't meant to fly. When radio was invented, you know, I mean, every invention has that. And so the question is, what are you doing with it? Is it for your benefit, for someone else's benefit? Are you doing it to yourself? Are you enhancing yourself? When you look at the United States history in this area, Secretary of Energy O'Leary under Clinton said that over 500,000 Americans have been used in human experimentation without their consent over a 40-year period. That included everything from MK Ultra to syphilis with black Americans in the Southeast, radioactive iodine, to my Native American brothers in Alaska, you know, on and on and on and on. You know, and the reality is they get caught, they ask forgiveness, and they do it again. And then you get administrations that actually don't care whatever happened before or what the courts say, because they're going to run the courts before it's all over. And they already do. But the point is, again, going back to this, here are tools that can enhance some of this without interference, which I think is a really important aspect of all of this. When you look at the HemiSync, which is all of the audio material I have, HemiSync I like because, first of all, they don't use any subliminals. And let me explain why subliminals are so important to understand. If I say dog in this room, some people are going to have warm, fuzzy feelings. Other people are going to be gripped with fear because of childhood experience or other bad experience with animals. Words are symbols for thoughts. A communicator understands that and tries to paint the picture as best we can with words rather than images. But when you use subliminals, where you're dropping below the conscious level of perception, if those words conflict in some way with your root belief systems, they can be more damaging than helpful. So you want to know exactly what those words are so they line up with your belief systems so there's no conflicts. All the Monroes that use voice do that, and you can tell which ones. They're either called Mind, Food, or Human Plus, and they have verbal guidance. It'll say on the back of each one whether it has verbal guidance or not in the very first line. The rest are just tonal, only it doesn't just do the binaural effect, what Monroe also did. And this is patented. You can actually pull the patents and look at them because he proved that you could do this. It's not some speculative thing. He did it in the lab, proved it, got his patents, and he did it. Now, the other thing he did is take like super meditators, super learners, people who had profound ability to fall asleep and stay asleep in a deep state, begin looking at their brainwave patterns, and then digitize signals on the disc to replicate those patterns in the part of the hearer, which is why you have to use a headset to get first the binaural effect and also get the full effect. So you've got the super meditator, and you're able to emulate what's going on in terms of the gross wave form. It doesn't interfere with your thoughts or that, but it puts you definitely in that same meditative state that might have taken someone years and years to master. At the same time, again, anchoring that, once you're there enough times, and good meditators will tell you, once you've done it, once you get that first, aha, I see it, and then it might be weeks, months, maybe even years before you get the second one, and then you start to recognize the pattern, and then it becomes easier and easier and easier. And that's the way the brain works. The other, there's another way to stimulate the brain. We talk about light, we talk about sound, is electrocranial stimulation. And I apologize, I didn't bring a screwdriver to replace the batteries, and I hate this device anyway. It was the first mind technology that I had actually bought, and you can see it's got some wear and tear. These are little electrodes, and essentially you had to glue them up, which is why they have deteriorated a little bit. You had to glue them up so that you could get good conduction, and two fit here and two fit behind the ears. And what this did is cover this range of approximately, it had two settings, it goes up to 12.5 hertz, and it's adjustable. So you can adjust it, and you could increase the power level so that this would stay in the green, and you see this needle pulse. And essentially I could adjust it and get the same kind of effect. If I wanted 7.83 hertz, I could set it at 7.83 hertz. Only in this case it's electromagnetic energy, because this would kick out an electrical discharge that runs on two 9-volt batteries and pulse energy into the brain, which entrains the brain to follow that. I didn't like it because it was cumbersome. It's difficult to use. It's a little messy. But it's just another way to illustrate another oscillating field to be able to affect the brain. Now, I showed you this one, this Acupointer Plus, is interesting as a device, but the sensitivities on it, when you look at sensitivity on the hands, there's so much energy from the hands that it can't get a reading. You can't pick out the points until you get on the back of the hand, because so much energy radiates from the hands themselves. This one, the point mate, this one does not stimulate, and it has a ground to complete the circuit. But the idea here is you can click it down sensitive enough to where you can locate the points on the hand. So there are other instruments out there that these are good for people that specialize like in acupressure, where they want to affect you but they don't want to needle you. They can find the point accurately and then work with it. But just a nice simple instrument, again an illustration of the fact that we have these electrical differences on the surface of the skin. You know, acupuncture is not some squishy esoteric science. It's real science with real things involved once you start to look at what's going on within those points. And this is not anything new. It's been around thousands of years. The other one, this is a third device. This is the this AcuPlus is an Australian device. It's not available in the United States. This one has got a few more dials and a little more complexity. It requires a ground strap, and it has something that looks more like a needle and feels more like a needle when it's used. It does have a locator function. These were like $350, $400, so they were way beyond what was necessary for affecting the same thing. And not available in the U.S. because they consider a medical device for import, so it creates some problems. But a nice device, and again, just another illustration of the technology. Now I want to tell you about the ultimate acupuncture technology I've ever seen. And if you want to go to the website which talks about it, it is emred.fi for Finland. And as I said, Reho, I'll give it to you again, emred.fi. Now, you'll run into the site, you'll have it in Finnish, you'll have it in English, so you can click on the appropriate one if you happen to speak Finnish. And I don't think there's anyone in this room that speaks that complicated language. But in any case, Anu is the daughter of Reho Michaela. And Anu has a degree in nutrition, a degree, I believe, in physics, a degree in physiology, advanced degrees. She is brilliant. I wouldn't say as brilliant as her father in one sense, but maybe more brilliant in another, you know? And his son is one of 2 hospital physicists in Finland. Brilliant as well, but nowhere near the good sense of humor his dad had. But these guys developed, and their dad developed the initial instruments, which were electro-laser acupuncture tools. And these were in combination. Now, you see a lot of these LED kind of lasers which don't have a whole lot of power. He used class 3 lasers. These are not burning lasers, but they're very powerful. They're not little cheap pointers and this kind of nonsense. They actually have some penetration. What he did is he looked at the wavelengths of the red laser, and then he installed an electrode around the head of that laser. Now, an acupuncture needle, if it's a millimeter or 2 off, has no effect if you miss the point. And you have this needle which sort of acts as a shunt for energy to hit that point and change its flow. It also picks up the biomagnetic energy of the guy putting it in and transmits some of that in there. And then it sort of sits away. With electrolaser, you got about a 2.5 millimeter laser head. And then around it, you have a magnetic field that gives you an extended range of about 1/2 inch. So as soon as you get close to the point, you're activating it. Now, the way he demonstrated it to me, in 1994 when I went over to see Reijo, and this was on my way over to Europe when I made the stop and met Gene, I went to him and he goes, you know, he did his diagnosis and he did, for me, he had shut down his lab for the week because we were supposed to go together to Asia and we both canceled and decided to just stick it out in Europe and go to his lab. So we're there and he does a urine test, blood test, a bunch of things. And he said to me at one point, he goes, you know, you had some kind of a lung disorder. And he was also an iridiologist. And when you study iridiology, it's a pretty interesting field. It's been around a while. And he said, you had a problem with your lungs. One's worse than the other. What he didn't know is 3 years before I had had double pneumonia. It almost killed me. You know, so one lung was pretty scarred, the other one not so bad. And I said, well, that's interesting. He goes, now I'm going to show you something. He says, I'm going to put this laser right here in this point on the very top, which is a general point, kind of hits everything. And he says, your primary lung points, you're going to get 2 red circles appear. He said there'd be about 1 centimeter around, about the size of a dime. And he says one's going to be dark red and one's going to be light red. And it's going to correlate with which lung has been most disturbed. And then he said the next thing you're going to get is you're going to get some sensation. I want you to tell me what they are. So I go, okay. So I'm thinking, I got my shirt off, I'm in the lab, he's doing his thing, and I'm looking at my chest, and sure enough, there they are. These 2 dots appear on my chest. At the same time, I'm feeling first this little kind of pulsing sensation, and then it's a hammering sensation, and it's a pinching sensation. And as they reached the max, I couldn't stand it anymore. I said, you got to take it away. And he took it away, and he said, what was going on is the energy goes through the acupuncture meridians, comes to those places where the blockage occurs, begins to create feedback, sends it back to the nerve endings at the point of input, and creates pain at the nerve endings there because it's not flowing through. He says if we did this until you reach the point of not being able to stand it repeatedly for a 4 to 6 week period, we'd do a lot of healing in terms of how your energy flows relative to your lung points. But it was an incredible technology. Now, he was challenged by the Finnish medical authorities, and he went to their highest court, and he won. And he trained 15 technicians before he died in electrolaser acupuncture. And his daughters carried on the work marvelously. She's treating MS, diabetes. They have 16,000 case studies in their family now. Diabetes, MS, certain forms of cancer, many, many hundreds of forms of cancer when you really look at the whole spectrum. So when people say this cures cancer, ask them which one. In this case, it's very few, but they've had some positive results. Hernias, where you have nationalized medicine, you're on the 8-week waiting list. People go through 4 weeks with him, everything goes back to normal. I mean, I saw the images of before and after where the lumps coming out of the stomach were gone, And this is not 1 or 2 anecdotal cases. This is 16,000 case studies from the Canary Islands, from Finland, and from Australia, all the places that he worked. And incredible stuff. So electrolaser even took it the next level. My acupuncturist in Alaska, I talked to him about Reijo, and he went over and took 6 weeks of study with him before he passed away, and who actually has a training institute in Helsinki and trains practitioners. And anyone who is in that field, I recommend it highly. It's not outrageously priced. It's all very reasonable. The courses of treatment, like for an MS treatment, it would take a 4 to 6 week period. It might cost less than $1,000 to complete the whole thing. Very inexpensive when you compare it to Western medicine, and not invasive. Now, the other things that they were doing was they were also looking at the resonant frequency of bacteria, and you hear about Rife generators all the time. You hear about these different things. Anu developed a diffused green laser that operated within certain wavelengths, which she analyzed bacteria to determine which ones would be destroyed at certain wavelengths, and has done it experimentally, has replicated all of that Rife did in terms of frequencies and has set the whole spectrum, and is now applying it and has a patent pending for food preservation. One of the most important things in the third world, the experiment she showed me, and I know I'm a little off topic, but I'm sorry, just the way it goes, is 2 Petri dishes where she had sliced a piece of meat, put one in one in the other, One she treated with this diffused laser, not heavy radiation that tears apart the nutrients, but something that tears apart the bacteria, leaves the rest of the tissue alone, and the rest of the material alone. The other one looked like what you would expect, green oozing goo after a month. The other one looked like he just sliced it off. She just sliced it off the steak. Now, when you think of food preservation, starvation in the world is primarily an issue of energy and refrigeration, more so than it is anything else. So if you can conquer that piece of the puzzle, then maybe we can conquer the rest of the problem. Food preservation is a big issue. There are some great independent scientists doing great work, and going back to the origination of what we intended to do was support and connect those scientists. The first scientists that we threw a lot of energy behind, besides Reho, betrayed us in a way that almost crippled us from being able to do it at all. We have risen back. We are back, you know, as they were back from the dust to do it again. Only this time we'll be smarter, we'll be better, and we'll get more accomplished. But these guys are out there, and they're doing good stuff. What we also, I told you about the device we demonstrated to the European Parliament, and it was the Neurophone, which was invented by Flanagan. And what we did is we took and looked at that technology, and there were a lot of problems with it in terms of the power levels and what the system could do. He had about a 30-circuit board in the original device going back to the 50s. Working with engineers in Germany, we created a circuit board with 130 circuits, smoothing the signal, increasing the volume, and using the device for sound transfer for a couple of different applications. The other thing we did is the old devices had no fusible link between you and the wall outlet, or you and the stereo, so there was potential for arcing. What we put in this device was an electro-optical coupler, so essentially the information flow, or the electrons flow in, they change to photons, and they change back to electrons, and it acts as a circuit breaker in the middle of this device, so you can't get fried when you're using it. These were being produced in Germany up until recently, and I'm going to need 2 volunteers to step forward so I can demonstrate this if I could. Got a couple volunteers. I'll take this person, this gentleman. Okay, and let me tell you a little bit about this. Now, these are piezoelectric transducers. And so what's on the back side of these metal plates is a little bit of ceramic material. When electric current hits it, it causes it to expand and contract. And in so doing, it creates a little bit of a drumming effect on the outside of this plate. So you will probably hear the sound that's playing through. So I got Bach playing on this. You'll hear the sound transit through, but what I'm going to ask, first I'm going to ask each of these folks to block their ears tightly with their fingertips. I'm going to place these just on their skin, and then they can tell you what they hear.
Hear the music.
Okay.
It's violin. It's a concerto of some sort.
Now I want you to hold this one in your hand, and I'm going to hold this one, and I'm going to hold your hand. You're going to hold her hand, and you're going to place this one up there. Flip it around.
Already.
And the situation is we're carrying this current through all of us. So now this thing is playing Bach, and under us is our whole energy grid. I could hook 10 people in here, and there'd be no decrease in volume. So it's not going through the nervous system because you would have too much resistance. The signal wouldn't carry efficiently. But carrying through the acupuncture meridians, which is the way I believe this actually works, you don't get the resistance, but our meridians are all vibrating at the same moment to the input signal, which means it's again that 3 or more. It's harmonizing people in an interesting way.
So I'm hearing that inside.
Yeah. Now,
that's bizarre.
now, you go ahead and sit down. Now, let me tell you another use for this. It's kind of interesting. That my friends in Germany we're doing anecdotally. And anecdotally, what they started doing is, everybody knows that if you have good, strong musical relationships as little children, that your mathematical abilities are highly increased. And that the more neuro connections, the more stimulation for young children, the more neuro connections form at a young age, the brighter the child is as they grow up. It's not just locked in because you're born, it's the input's important. So in that last trimester, when the last big wave of neural connections are forming and people sing to their babies and they talk to their babies and then they put speakers by their babies, but the sound is distorted as it goes through the tissue. Not with these. for language learning, language tapes, music, all those kinds of things that you can input to create more neural connections. And this runs on like a 9-volt battery. It's not a lot of power. Again, you think about it in terms of what are the possibilities if we can activate, if we could increase even 5% the neural connections in children when they come out. I mean, these are all steps that we can begin to take. And these are, you know, these are what's in the civilian sector right now. You know, this one, right now, because we produced them in Germany, they were so expensive. You know, we shut down the German production. We're moving it to the U.S., and I'm probably about 6 to 8 months away from having the resources to go ahead and put it in production again, because we want it out there. You know, it's used for accelerated learning. What also happens with these is because it's affecting and resonating the whole acupuncture system, you put in the right input, you know, the right kinds of music, the right kinds of tonal input, the whole system balances out with about a half hour of use and stays balanced unless you hit some stressful point for about a week. So for balancing the system out, for accelerated learning, and for these various applications. And it's called the Earth Pulse sound wave. And actually I have a process patent pending on this device, and so it's one of those that we're going to continue to advance, because here's one of the problems with this device that we found, and maybe there's someone in the room that has the answer, is the old neurophones, the very old ones going back to the 50s, the late 50s, early 60s, had a sine wave that looked, if you could draw it, it would look kind of like this, and then had a really sharp spike and a really quick drop, and then the same down below the line. It had 3,000 volts peak to peak, for those that are technically oriented. This one has 60 volts peak to peak, and instead of using a sine wave, it uses a square wave, which tends to bluntly hit the system rather than spike into the system. The problem with that quick spike and quick drop is it creates RF interference. Back in the 60s, before microcircuits, it wasn't a problem. Now you have to have certification that your device won't interfere with anyone else's to be able to license them. And so to get the power level back up, where the original devices I could put on my feet and hear it in my head with a heck of a lot more volume than I can kick out here. But for the hearing impaired, huge potential, because what's happening here is the coding bypasses the 8th cranial nerve in the entire hearing mechanism. When we hear with the ear, this is our array, our ear. If you close your eyes and I jingle keys, you can tell within a few degrees where I am in the room. Distort both arrays and then try it, and you won't be able to distinguish where I am in the room. So this is the first part. Sound wave hits the ear condenses that sound wave, hits the eardrum vibrates, and then right behind the eardrum is a little bit of water. And what did I say about sound and water yesterday when I was talking about sonars? 100% of the energy transits through the fluid, hits that space, hits the 3 small bones, eventually hits the 8th cranial nerve, transits to the auditory portion of the brain, and we perceive sound. But there are many now, that think the brain is sort of holographic in how it operates. So it doesn't matter how the sound input gets there, as long as the signal is in the proper coded sequence for the auditory portion of the brain to say, grab that one. You know, it's like wireless. You know, you grab that bit that corresponds, and then you hear sound. So this is sort of bypassing all of that. Now, instead of these invasive $30,000 implants that they're using for the hearing impaired, here's an external device. I have a audiologist and an audiologist and mechanical engineer in the Midwest that will do clinical studies as soon as I can produce a device where I can go back to that original sine wave, because that's what we need for the hearing impaired. And they'll do the studies for us for free. They're attached to a university institution where they can do it for us. So we know eventually, as our resources emerge, we're going to go and attack that one. And if we find the solution, we're going to license to every hearing aid company we can find, provided that they drop the price to where people can afford it. And if they won't, then we'll go find somebody who will. Because $5,000, $7,000, $8,000 hearing aids just create a bunch of chatter is not the answer on a circuit that we know in mass production could be done for a couple $100. And that's what we need. We need more accessible technologies that work, that solve problems that people can afford. In any case, that's a research area that we're continuing to pursue, and one that we think is important. When you talk about energy, and I didn't bring it because every time I travel with it, they screw it up, and it's my Carillion camera, and it's not these kind that you see around. This is the one using the Tesla coil that you use Polaroid film to actually look at photon discharges from the fingertips. And I usually bring it because I like everyone to have a chance in a small group like this to shoot their own and see what they look like. But I don't anymore because they just tear them up. I can't do it anymore. But I want to at least see photon discharges. Now these were first looked at in Eastern Europe, and they were looking at this concept of eyeless sight. How many have ever heard of eyeless sight? A few people. And you can do this, particularly with children between the ages of 12 and 15. And it's when certain portions of the brain are developing at their optimum. And what they were doing with blind children is they were in the former Soviet Union taking their hands over first color, and they could actually distinguish the colors because of the feel. And if you look at color going through a spectrum, going through a prism when the light goes through, the reason the color spreads is that the wavelengths are different. In other words, there is a perceptible difference. So you've got people without sight that have highly sensitized systems, and it was discovered by accident because one young woman displayed this. They began to test it and find out they could duplicate it in other people. So they could get eyeless sight, where they could first distinguish color, then images, and then read words. Pretty amazing stuff. And it's documented in a book, Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain by Ostrander and Schroeder, and that book has since been updated. I know those guys. I read them when I was in my early teens, and I talk to them once in a while these days, just because they've read my stuff, I've read their stuff. We got a lot of interesting ideas we exchange.
I read it.
And it's a good book. It's been updated. You can find it also on my website at earthpulse.com, because we carry all of that stuff when we can. Let me think what else I want to cover, because I don't want to run out of time, and I want to leave time for questions, because I'm getting into a lot of stuff. I've talked about, one of the other things, I want to give a couple little tricks that are useful before you take a test for your kids, and this is something you can do with little kids. One of the other things that they found is that oxygen to the brain was really important. And we have this mechanism, if we hold our breath, hold your breath as long as you can, what happens then is all these veins and blood vessels start to dilate in going into your head, because the objective of the body is save the brain, save the brain. So everything dilates, get as much oxygen to the brain as you can. You hold it as hard as long as you can, and then you release it. You have the maximum oxygen to the brain. It's the best situation just before you take a test, because you get your intellectual capacity up. If you start doing this like a game with little kids around 4 or 5, where they'll play the game with you, let's all hold our breath as long as we can, and you do it, what happens over time, and it'll last for about half an hour, the effect, because it keeps everything dilated for about that amount of time before it all goes back. With little kids, if you start to do it at that age, they tend to stay dilated, which means they get more oxygen flow, which means they get more going on there. So you play the game with them a couple times a day. It's a simple game. Let's see who can do it the longest. And then they don't know what they're doing, but they're increasing their brain capacity and learning capacity just by that simple exercise. The other thing that happens when you hold your breath that long is you set up this rhythm right here. It's about 7 hertz. Boop, 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 boop. You start hitting an alpha rhythm. So it's another ideal combination. You got the alpha rhythm and you got the increased oxygen flow. Now you're going to go take a test. You're in the zone. It's a real cheap trick. Okay?
It's great when you're trying to stay awake driving, too.
Absolutely, for the same reason, because you're increasing, that oxygen flow. And this is really, really simple stuff. Most of the stuff is simple. Everyone else makes it complicated, and that's what we're here to diffuse. All of this stuff is the beginnings. There are so much more out there and so much more coming. The thing I will say to everyone in the room, take a look at what's behind the technology. Ask for the scientific literature. A gentleman today gave me some materials, and my first question was, where's the scientific literature? It's on the website. Okay, it's a fair question to ask. When I had somebody highly offended the other day, and I didn't talk to him. He came and talked to me because somebody said, well, this product has, this and this and this capability. I said, oh, let me see the scientific papers. And he goes, well, it's testimonials. I said, no. Those are interesting, and I don't discount them by any means. But placebo effects have been proven. The effects of prayer have been proven. A lot of other things can take place. So I said, let me see some independent science. Like particularly with cell phone safety, there's lots of devices. Federal Trade Commission took 7 or 8 of them off the market. We carry one, but it has a U.S. patent associated with it and a third-party scientific report. ask for it. You know, when you're going to do something that's going to change your life, ask for the literature. And they'll either say, no, I don't have it, but try it, and if you don't like it, send it back and I'll give you your money back. That's fair enough. You can do that. But most of them won't say that. They won't have the scientific literature, and they won't allow you the opportunity to try. And if you're not happy, send it back. So, you know, keep that all in mind. Make sure that what you're doing lines up with your own belief system. More importantly, make sure that you really look at the facts, because too many people make strong statements and then don't support them adequately. And I think that's got to be the watchword for the day. With that, I'm going to open to questions, but I'll just describe quickly what's here. I talked about the HemiSync. I've got the HemiSync are $20 each, or 3 for $48. The books are $15 each, or 3 for $35. Cell guards for cell phones, I just have a few left. For this group, I was selling them at 20. For this group, they're 15 apiece. These antennas units are listed at $169. For this group, $150 apiece. These are listed at $229, $200 apiece. These are normally $129, the pointer pluses, at $120. And the videos, these are mind control, which is pretty much what you heard with the demonstration of all these tools and the Carillion camera. But it's about an hour-and-a-half version, so a little bit shorter, abbreviated, less stories, more meat, maybe. And with them is a CD-ROM. And they look very similar, so you got to look close for which one's a CD-ROM. CD-ROM for the computer has ancillary material, other stuff I thought people might want to have. Technologies for the 21st century is sonars, Haarp, privacy technologies, and cell phones. So that's on this one, and again a CD-ROM hooked to it, so there's more material, but they look exactly the same, so you got to look close. These are $20 each, or 2 for $35. With all that done and out of the way and the commercial over, I want to take some questions because I know I've forgotten things, and there's things that maybe I need to amplify a little bit more. Gentleman in the back, please.
Going back to the comment with Greg Braden, having heard him, I know he said that his source was the U.S. Geological Service or something. Are they dealing with electromagnetics and they're dealing with magnetics? Is that possible?
If you're measuring Schumann's resonance, there's only one. And here's the other thing. Okay, let's say it is rising. Let's assume it is rising. It was discovered in 1953. So what does that mean? We haven't had enough observation over time to know what that means. Whether it was higher before, lower before, or what. We have no clue because it's too new. And there's no historical precedence to say anything has happened. But when you look at UCLA and when he was promoting all this, and I think Greg's done some great work, so please don't feel like I'm slamming him, because I'm really not. I'm just saying that occasionally people pick up bits of information and don't necessarily interpret it correctly or see it correctly. But when you go to a UCLA website at that time and see clearly it had not changed, except within a very narrow variable, then you have to say, Greg, let's go back and look at this again. And I think he did, and I think he has, you know, at some point, because I know his publisher, who also published one of my videos early on, and they went and asked him about it, you know, in not a bad way, just to say, hey, let's make sure we got it right. But so many people are now repeating that now it's part of the common knowledge. So this is important, because this is why I always ask, would you change your life over that? And if you will, then you better go look it up. Okay? Because it's like, you know, why would you do that? I mean, it's any different than a guy approaching you on the street and handing you a leaflet, and you're going to believe that? No, of course not. Don't look at it any differently. Just because I'm standing here and you're sitting there doesn't make me any different. In fact, it makes me less than you, because my job is to lift up people, not hold information and keep it to myself and do something for myself. It's not about that. It's about getting rid of it as quick as I can so more can come in and I can get rid of that too. There was a question over here. No? Any? Yes, sir.
A little more background on Haarp. That's pretty much in your backyard, isn't it?
Yeah, 250 miles northeast of Anchorage. And so it's a little, well, in Alaska's terms, that's our backyard. You know, I mean, Alaska is 586,000 square miles. We have longer coastline east and west and Gulf Coast combined. From where I sit, the top of the state, 700 miles away. Southeast is almost 1,100 miles away, and the furthest on the southwest is 2,000 miles away. So
better pack a lunch.
It's, yeah, better pack a lunch and you better have a plane.
So, can you see the thing?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can get fairly close to it. I mean, you can't hide it. We have the highest amount of small planes in the world in Alaska. You cannot hide this facility. So it's a developmental prototype. They acknowledge it. They have an open house for all the school kids once a year, and they do their dog and pony show. And it's there. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, they've gotten a little more secure about it because a lot of people are upset within the area, and Alaskans are a little bit independent. Anything could happen, which, you know, and I don't encourage that. I think that's fundamentally wrong. There are processes, as much as they're flawed, they're the processes we have and the process we need to use, so we can stay out of jail and continue to do good work and maybe see a change. But yeah, it's there. You know, there's a lot going on with Haarp. The best I can say is we try and keep people updated through radio, to the radio programs that we work with, and I've heard lots of radio people remind me of where they had heard me. I work with 200 guys around the world, and so we're on somewhere, someplace, almost all the time. And we continue to follow this issue, and we'll continue to follow it till we're not breathing anymore or the problem's solved. Yes, ma'am.
There was a gentleman discussing how easy it was for him to walk into the center, and I've done...
To the gate.
To the gate. I've done research at different times about mind control, and what people need to be aware of is the use of microwave radiation and other things that cannot be seen that can make them feel physically ill as they approach something, change your mental state, all other aspects like that with potential long-term effects.
Right.
Have you been doing research to see which areas are using this? I know there's documentation in England.
Yeah, you're talking about Green Commons or something like this where they tested it. The book Earth Rising, the Revolution, I cover those technologies in depth with the documents to support it. That book has 650 sources cited. Those are individual sources. Yeah, it's there. I mean, that technology is there. And we trace it all the way from the evolution of what was needed to know that. The guy Woody Norris, who invented the microwave hearing that I described earlier. Woody has also developed a system that uses sound to create sensations of pain, to bring you to your knees. You know, and they use that as an electronic fence. Well, John Alexander's work, you can even go back further, you know, when you go back, and I quote him in Controlling the Human Mind, which is forthcoming. He wrote in, I believe it was a 1981 article, he was talking about being able to psychically control someone else from another place. He was talking in those days, stuff that he doesn't generally talk about today even, back then. The accretion of Manchurian candidates were discussed in one of his articles. The idea of transferring disease wirelessly. You know, in fact, how many remember Coevolution Quarterly? Does anybody remember that one? There's a few remember. Coevolution Quarterly. It was a magazine. 1978 issue. I read, and it has a next, I believe it was the winter spring, but I might be wrong, and because it's been a little while, 78. But there's some great articles on Tesla, but there's also a very interesting article about transferring disease through 2 petri dishes. And what they did is they used a quartz crystal and a wire lead, and one was infected and one wasn't, and then the uninfected became infected. And this was some of the basis for John Alexander's thoughts in 1981 when he published that article. So yeah, that's all out there.
The other interesting thing I found out when I was doing just a tiny amount of mind control research was that he was on the board of Silver Mind Control for years.
Yeah.
And if you talk about a perfect medium to make your Manchurian candidates, millions of people worldwide have gone through that.
Right. Well, they have created them. In fact, the Unabomber was an MK Ultra victim, according to the New York Times. You know, and that we quote also in this particular book. I mean, we found some of the best stuff, because what we did is we took the net and weaved it back together so we can see. And we know we missed 10 times of what we found, but we found enough to truly illustrate the point. And if I had spent the time to go through the 16,000 unclassified records that I have, I know I would have put in a lot more, but we had plenty. I mean, 300 source documents is enough for most titles, and that's what we stuffed into that one, so it was pretty full. I'll take this one, and I'll take George. Thank you.
On the mind control, is there anybody that it doesn't work against, or if you were feeling like you were in danger because you're going somewhere, or you heard something was going on, is there anything that kind of blocks it?
Okay, this is important. Firstly, if you look at brainwave activity of people who are nervous, fearful, angry, resentful, revengeful, all these negative emotions, you see incoherent brain patterns in the EEG. You look at people experiencing compassion, empathy, love, you get coherent, rhythmic patterns in the EEG. Because that's when you can think clearly. That's when you're functioning properly. As soon as you succumb to fear, you've already lost your ability to resist anything. because your ability to maintain a strong system that has a beat frequency that it's plugged into that is stronger than the external signal coming in. Remember, these are very weak signals coming in. Even their own literature says using the whole geomagnetic fields of the Earth would only affect about 70% of the population. The reason they say that is people with strong systems or people who are in proximity of energy sources that are stronger than this one coming in, your body will lock onto the stronger signal. So if you had something creating an oscillation of say 8 or 9 hertz operating in your house that was strong, you know, say approximately equal to what the Earth creates, well, that's about 50 times more than what you're going to get off of something like Haarp. So you're going to lock on a stronger signal. That's about the only thing, but because you can use TV, radios, power grids to carry a signal, you can't screen them all out. I mean, microwave's easy, you know, metal mesh screen to ground, you know, that's done. You know, but that only does one thing. You know, like for these that they're going to direct at us, the microwave heating, you know, the ones they got now for creating heating on the surface skin. You know, protesters need to start building in metal mesh screens in the back of their signs, and then having them drag a ground wire on the ground so when they hit you, you at least have a fighting chance to ground the microwave radiation that's coming at you through that screen.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I hope there's many of them out there that work. Make sure it's ferrous metal, because a lot of the screen now is plastic and it won't work for you.
But I guess that was helpful. But are they ever like just sending it out to try and like make a group, like you said about the voting, just people on the fence? They can't make everybody vote for one person.
No. No.
Control the count.
You know, the thing is are they doing it now? And the answer, I cannot give you a definitive answer on that because I don't have documents that would support that. All I can tell you is what we know in the record. We know about Bush's thing. We know the technology exists. Would they, could they? You know, you ask yourselves a question. You trust these guys? You trust Coca-Cola? You know, you trust all the advertisers? You trust all these people out there running corporate America? And if you do, don't worry about it. You know, I don't, you know, because I've seen too much. You know, I come from a political family. I've traveled all over the world. And everybody I met who's doing anything significantly has a deep-rooted philosophy underlying it. That's what you need to find. That's what I went to find when I established my relationship with Dorothy, is who is under that? And what does their life represent? How are they? You know, I studied crystallography as a young kid. That was one of my things. In fact, I studied Gemological Institute here in LA. Crystallography. I was certified in diamond appraisal at 16. And crystallography I used to lecture on in high school, because that's the way I got my speech credit. And crystal is the outward expression of the internal arrangement of atoms by definition. Think about a human being as the outward expression of our internal arrangement of energy. That's what we are. This is our physical form. This is the pinhole from which all energy and all creation flows. I believe that. That's philosophical, okay? I would go with that. But as such, we have the opportunity to do incredible things if we recognize that it's just a matter of accommodating the flow. And that's the steps that we each take that are positive, that are constructive. And like a lot of people jump into controversial issues and they jump way beyond where they should be in those issues. And so they get stressed. And you can tell the difference. When you push against something, we all can remember this. We press against something, we press hard, we press hard, we press hard, we really want it, we really want it. We finally kick the door open, we get through it, we get to the other side and go, what the heck did I do? On the other hand, when you push against the wall and it just kind of, you get a little resistance, but it just parts and you jump to the other side, because there's always resistance, it's, okay, this is right. When it's that hard of a resistance, you may not be the person, it may not be the time. Pull back, the door should open, because the step of faith is the action you take in furtherance of what you believe to be right and true, but it's when it's that much resistance, just back off a little bit. Because otherwise you create stress for yourself. Brain coherence goes out the window, your ability to do anything falls apart, and usually what you see in those instances is people's economies collapse, they then are isolated, they're not capable of carrying on any work at all because they've jumped further than their immediate sphere of influence and where life should take them. And we're all anxious to get to the finish line, but let's make sure we take the steps to get there, because we're not just going to materialize there. And a lot of us forget it. I forget it. I mean, my wife is great, because she's, you know, wait a minute, slow down this a little bit, think about this one. Okay, and it's, you know, we have those people in our lives that moderate our lives, and that's extremely important. So, step of faith, again, isn't some mysterious thing. It's acting on what we know to be right and true. With that, I'm going to conclude to give time for people to look and time for me to break down The equipment I'm going to go ahead and start breaking down, but this stuff I'm going to leave up because we've got another speaker coming in at 1. Is that right? 1? Okay. And thanks for